The gymnasium at Camp Sullivan erupted with laughter as Maya Chun's water bottle slipped from her hands, clattering across the polished floor like a metallic thunderclap. Staff Sergeant Derek Morrison's voice boomed across the training facility, his words dripping with theatrical contempt as he gestured toward her with exaggerated disappointment. "Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Look at this, everyone. Our little recruit can't even hold on to basic equipment." His cronies joined the chorus of mockery, their voices echoing off the concrete walls as Maya bent to retrieve the bottle. Her movements were precise, controlled, almost mechanical in their efficiency. She didn't rush, didn't fumble, didn't show the embarrassment they were trying to provoke. Morrison stepped closer, his shadow falling across her crouched form. "Tell me, Chen, how exactly did you make it through basic training? Did Daddy pull some strings? Maybe Mommy knows someone important?" The gathered soldiers shifted uncomfortably, some pulling out phones to record what was clearly becoming another one of Morrison's infamous humiliation sessions. Maya straightened slowly, her dark eyes meeting Morrison's with a steadiness that should have given him pause. On her chest, barely visible beneath the standard-issue uniform jacket, something small caught the fluorescent light. A pin, worn and weathered, its edges softened by time and handling. Morrison was too busy performing for his audience to notice. The way Maya's hand unconsciously moved to cover it, or how her breathing remained perfectly controlled despite the public ridicule. "No excuses, Sergeant," Maya replied quietly, her voice carrying an odd weight that made the laughter die down slightly. "Just getting back to work." Morrison's eyes narrowed. Something about her calm response irritated him more than tears or anger would have. "Work? You call stumbling around my training facility work? Maybe you should consider a transfer to administrative duties where Butterfingers won't get anyone killed." What Morrison didn't see was the way Captain Elena Rodriguez had paused in the doorway, her attention caught by the distinctive way Maya held herself. Rodriguez had seen that pairing before, in places where mistakes cost lives and composure meant the difference between mission success and catastrophe. Her eyes traced the lines of Maya's uniform, noting details that others missed. The way the fabric fell suggested muscle memory from different gear. The slight tan line on her wrist spoke of equipment worn for extended periods. And there, almost hidden beneath her jacket, the edge of something that made Rodriguez's breath catch. Maya Chen lived in Building C, Apartment 23, a standard military housing unit that differed from hundreds of others only in its deliberate emptiness. The walls bore no photographs, no personal mementos, no evidence of the life she'd lived before arriving at Camp Sullivan 6 months ago. Her closet contained exactly what regulations required, and nothing more. 3 uniforms hung with military precision, their creases sharp enough to cut paper. The apartment's most notable feature was what wasn't there. No television dominated the living room. No comfortable furniture invited relaxation. The single bookshelf held only technical manuals and regulation handbooks, their spines unmarked by the casual handling that suggested regular reading. Maya had learned to live small, to occupy space without claiming it, to exist without leaving. Traces that might invite questions she couldn't answer. Her morning routine began at precisely 0500 hours, though she'd been awake for 47 minutes already. Sleep came in fragments, interrupted by sounds that others wouldn't notice. The distant rumble of aircraft engines, the rhythmic cadence of running formations, the sharp crack of small arms fire from the distant ranges. Each sound triggered memories she worked constantly to suppress, echoes of operations that officially never happened in places that didn't exist on any map. Black coffee filled a standard-issue mug, no cream or sugar to soften its bitter edge. Her hands remained steady as she lifted it, though careful observers might have noticed the network of small scars across her knuckles and the calluses that spoke of extensive weapons training. Maya touched the small pin beneath her uniform jacket exactly 17 times while she drank her coffee. Not 16, not 18, 17, always 17. The pin itself was unremarkable to casual inspection. Worn metal, its original finish long since dulled by handling and time. But to those who knew how to look, it represented something far more significant than its humble appearance suggested. It marked her as one of fewer than 300 women who had ever earned the right to wear it. A member of an elite unit, whose existence was acknowledged only in the most classified documents, whose operations were discussed only in rooms where electronic devices were forbidden and every word carried the weight of national security. Maya's commute to the training facility took her past the base's memorial wall, where polished granite bore the names of those who had given their lives in service. She always slowed as she passed, her eyes finding specific names etched into the stone: Rodriguez Patricia, Martinez Sophia, Williams Amanda. 14 names in total, each representing a teammate who hadn't made it home from operations that would never appear in history books. Her fingers would find the pin during these moments, tracing its edges through her uniform in a ritual of remembrance that had become as essential as breathing. 17 touches. One for each of her fallen teammates, one for each mission they'd completed together, one for each promise she'd made to carry their memory forward. Staff Sergeant Morrison's harassment had begun almost immediately after her arrival at Camp Sullivan. Something about Maya's quiet competence seemed to irritate him, as if her mere presence challenged his authority in ways he couldn't articulate. He'd started with small humiliations, extra duty assignments during off hours, public criticism of her performance despite her consistently high scores, deliberate exclusion from training exercises where her skills might have been noticed by superior officers. Maya endured it all with the same controlled silence that had served her well in far more dangerous situations. She'd learned long ago that responding to provocation only escalated conflict, and escalation drew attention. Attention led to questions. Questions could uncover truths that were meant to remain buried in classified files and redacted reports. The other soldiers at Camp Sullivan had quickly learned to give Morrison a wide berth when he was in one of his moods. His reputation for petty tyranny was well established, his ability to make life miserable for those who crossed him legendary. Throughout the base, most simply avoided him when possible and endured his presence when necessary. Maya didn't have that luxury. As one of the newest arrivals and apparently lacking any influential connections, she'd become his favorite target. What Morrison failed to understand was that Maya's silence wasn't submission. It was operational. Discipline maintained through force of will and years of training that had taught her to endure far worse than public humiliation. She'd been interrogated by professionals who made Morrison's amateur theatrics look like playground taunting. She'd maintained operational security while suffering injuries that would have broken lesser soldiers. A staff sergeant's wounded ego was hardly worth compromising the carefully constructed identity she'd built around her new assignment. Captain Rodriguez had been watching the situation develop with growing concern. As the base's intelligence officer, she was trained to notice patterns that others missed. Morrison's targeting of Maya seemed unusually intense, even for someone with his documented history of problematic behavior. More intriguingly, Maya's responses suggested training that went far beyond standard military instruction. Rodriguez had run a preliminary background check on Maya Chen, finding exactly what she'd expected to find: a service record that was simultaneously detailed and completely uninformative. Training certifications that were impressive but somehow generic. Commendations that praised her performance without specifying exactly what she'd performed. It was the kind of file that intelligence professionals recognized immediately. A cover identity, constructed with enough genuine elements to pass casual inspection, while hiding the real story beneath layers of bureaucratic misdirection. The first major confrontation came during a combat readiness exercise designed to test soldiers' ability to perform under stress. Morrison had assigned Maya to the most challenging scenario, one that typically resulted in failure for even experienced personnel. Multiple targets, limited ammunition, complex tactical objectives that required split-second decision-making under simulated combat conditions. Maya approached the exercise with the same methodical preparation she brought to everything else. She studied the course layout, calculated angles and distances, planned her route with the precision of someone who'd navigated far more dangerous terrain under actual enemy fire. When the exercise began, she moved through the course with fluid efficiency that made it look almost effortless. Her shooting was surgical. Every round found its target with mechanical precision. Her movement between positions showed tactical awareness that spoke of extensive training in close-quarters combat. Most impressively, she completed the exercise in a time that would have been respectable for special operations personnel, let alone a supposedly inexperienced soldier assigned to routine duties. Morrison's face cycled through several emotions. As he watched Maya's performance, surprise gave way to irritation, then to something approaching alarm as he realized that her display of competence undermined his carefully constructed narrative about her inadequacy. He quickly moved to minimize the significance of her success, announcing to the gathered observers that the exercise had been too easy and that her performance wasn't indicative of real combat capability. But Captain Rodriguez had seen enough. The way Maya handled her weapon spoke of muscle memory developed through extensive use under stress. Her tactical movement showed training that wasn't available in standard military courses. Most tellingly, her emotional control throughout the exercise suggested experience with genuine life-or-death situations, where failure meant more than embarrassment or poor performance reviews. That evening, Rodriguez accessed more sophisticated databases using authorization codes that required justification reports and security reviews. What she found made her lean back in her chair and reconsider everything. She thought she knew about the quiet soldier who'd been enduring Morrison's harassment with such remarkable composure. Maya Chen's real file told a very different story than the sanitized version in her personnel folder, classified at levels that required presidential authorization to access. It detailed a career that read like fiction, but was documented with the meticulous precision that marked genuine special operations records. Multiple deployments to locations that didn't officially exist. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Operations that had prevented terrorist attacks, eliminated high-value targets, and secured intelligence that had shaped national policy. The small pin that Maya wore wasn't just a memento. It was the operational insignia of Ghost Unit 17, an elite special forces team that operated in the shadows between military and intelligence communities. Only 300 women had ever qualified for the unit. Only 70 had survived their first year of operations. Maya Chen had served for 4 years, participating in 17 classified missions that had collectively saved thousands of lives. Rodriguez found mission reports that detailed Maya's performance in situations that would have broken most soldiers. Capture and interrogation behind enemy lines. Solo operations in hostile territory lasting weeks without support. Combat against overwhelming odds, where her tactical decisions had meant the difference between mission success and international incidents. The last entry in Maya's file explained why she was now serving at Camp Sullivan under a cover identity. Operation Nightfall had gone catastrophically wrong. Compromised intelligence had led Ghost Unit 17 into an ambush that decimated the team. 14 operators had died in a firefight that officially never happened. Maya had been the sole survivor, extracted after 48 hours of evading enemy forces while wounded and carrying classified materials that, couldn't be allowed to fall into hostile hands. The psychological evaluation that followed her extraction painted a picture of someone struggling with survivor's guilt and post-traumatic stress. Recommended treatment included extended leave and assignment to low-stress duties that would allow her to process the trauma while maintaining her security clearance. Her cover identity at Camp Sullivan was supposed to provide the anonymity and routine that mental health professionals believed necessary for her recovery. Rodriguez closed the classified files and sat in silence, processing the implications of what she'd learned. Chen wasn't just enduring Morrison's harassment because she was afraid to fight back. She was maintaining operational discipline that prevented her from responding with skills that would raise questions about her true identity. Every insult she absorbed, every humiliation she endured, was a conscious choice to protect secrets that were essential to national security. More troubling was the realization that Morrison's behavior wasn't just unprofessional, it was potentially dangerous. If he pushed Maya too far, if he created a situation where her training took over, the results could be catastrophic. A woman who'd spent 4 years eliminating threats to national security possessed skills that could end Morrison's harassment permanently and violently. Rodriguez made a decision that would change everything. It was time to have a conversation with Chen, one that acknowledged the truth both women had been carefully avoiding. But first, she needed to understand exactly why Morrison had targeted Maya so specifically. His behavior suggested more than random bullying. There was something personal in his attacks, something that implied knowledge he shouldn't possess. That night, Rodriguez began her own investigation into Staff Sergeant Derek Morrison's background, looking for connections that might explain his seemingly irrational focus on destroying a soldier whose real capabilities he couldn't possibly understand. What she discovered would prove that the situation at Camp Sullivan was far more complex and dangerous than either she or Maya had realized. Morrison's service record showed a pattern of mediocrity punctuated by moments of cruelty that had somehow never resulted in serious disciplinary action. He'd served in logistics and administrative roles throughout his career, never seeing combat, but somehow developing the bitter resentment of someone who felt the military had failed to recognize his true potential. His performance evaluations painted a picture of someone competent, enough to avoid discharge but lacking the leadership qualities necessary for advancement beyond his current rank. More interesting were the gaps in his record. Extended periods of temporary duty that weren't fully explained. Training courses that seemed unrelated to his official assignments. Most intriguingly, a 6-month assignment to a joint task force that handled personnel transitioning from classified assignments to conventional military roles. A program that would have given him access to information about soldiers like Maya, who were being reassigned under cover identities. Rodriguez felt her blood run cold as the implications became clear. Morrison didn't just suspect that Maya was more than she appeared to be. He knew. Somehow he'd gained access to classified information about her true background, and he was using that knowledge to torment her in ways that prevented her from defending herself without compromising her cover. The question was whether his harassment represented personal sadism or something more sinister. If Morrison had learned about Maya's background through unauthorized access to classified files, he was committing serious crimes that threatened national security. If he was being directed by outside forces who wanted to expose or eliminate a former special operations asset, the situation was even more dangerous. Rodriguez realized she was facing a decision that would define the rest of her career. She could report her suspicions through official channels and hope that the bureaucratic machinery would eventually address the situation. Or she could take direct action to protect a soldier who'd given everything in service to her country and was now being systematically destroyed by someone who might be working for hostile interests. The choice wasn't difficult. Rodriguez had spent her entire career serving alongside soldiers who put mission and team above personal considerations. Maya Chen represented the best of that tradition, and she deserved better than to be sacrificed to bureaucratic indifference or enemy action. Tomorrow, Rodriguez would begin the process of exposing Morrison and protecting Maya. She would use every resource at her disposal, call in every favor she'd accumulated over 15 years of service, and if necessary, risk her own career to ensure that a genuine hero received the protection she'd earned through her sacrifice and service. But first, she needed to warn Maya that her cover might be compromised and that the harassment she'd been enduring could escalate into something far more dangerous than public humiliation. The conversation would require delicate handling, given the security considerations involved. But Rodriguez was confident that two professionals could find a way to communicate despite the constraints imposed by classification levels and operational security. What Rodriguez didn't know was that Maya had already begun to suspect that Morrison's behavior indicated knowledge of her true background. The specific nature of his taunts, the way he seemed to anticipate her responses, the timing of his attacks, all suggested access to information that should have been far beyond his security clearance. Maya had spent the past week conducting her own careful investigation, using skills developed during years of intelligence operations to probe Morrison's background without raising suspicions. What she'd discovered had convinced her that the situation at Camp Sullivan was approaching a crisis point that would require decisive action. The question was whether she could trust Captain Rodriguez with the truth, or whether the intelligence officer's interest in her situation represented another threat to be carefully managed. Years of operating in environments where anyone might be an enemy had taught Maya to trust sparingly and verify constantly. The next phase of the confrontation would test both women's ability to navigate the complex intersection of personal loyalty, professional duty, and national security. Neither fully understood the forces arrayed against them, but both were prepared to do whatever was necessary to protect the mission and the soldiers under their care. The storm that had been building for months was about to break, and when it did, the truth about Maya Chen and the real reason for her assignment to Camp Sullivan would be revealed in ways that neither Morrison nor his potential handlers had anticipated. The quiet soldier who'd endured humiliation with such remarkable composure was about to remind everyone involved that some people were dangerous precisely because they chose not to be. The investigation began before dawn on a Tuesday morning. When Captain Rodriguez accessed the base's secure communication system using credentials that few possessed, her fingers moved across the encrypted keyboard with practiced efficiency, navigating through layers of classified databases that required multiple authorization codes and biometric verification. The information she sought wouldn't be found in standard personnel files or routine security reports. Maya Chen's morning routine proceeded with its usual precision, unaware that her carefully constructed cover was being examined by someone with the skills and clearance to see through it. She completed her 17 touches of the pin beneath her uniform jacket, each contact a silent promise to teammates who would never know their sacrifice was being honored in such a simple yet profound way. The weight of their memory had become as essential to her daily existence as breathing or the steady rhythm of her heartbeat. Rodriguez's search revealed fragments of truth scattered across multiple intelligence networks. Operation Nightfall appeared in incident reports filed by agencies that didn't officially coordinate with each other. Ghost Unit 17 was referenced in budget allocations that were buried beneath layers of bureaucratic misdirection. Maya's real name surfaced in medical records from a military hospital that specialized in treating personnel whose injuries couldn't be explained through conventional military service. The psychological evaluation that had led to Maya's assignment at Camp Sullivan painted a disturbing picture of someone struggling with survivor's guilt so severe that mental health professionals worried about her long-term stability. 14. Teammates dead in an ambush that intelligence failures had made inevitable. 48 hours of evading enemy forces while wounded and carrying intelligence. Materials that could have compromised ongoing operations across 3 continents. Extraction under fire with enemy units closing in from multiple directions. Rodriguez paused in her reading, understanding for the first time the true weight that Maya carried. The quiet soldier who endured Morrison's harassment with such remarkable composure wasn't just protecting her cover identity. She was protecting herself from memories that threatened to overwhelm her carefully maintained emotional control. Every day at Camp Sullivan was an exercise in psychological survival, a battle against trauma that made Morrison's petty cruelty seem almost insignificant by comparison. Staff Sergeant Morrison arrived at his office that same morning with the satisfied expression of someone who believed his campaign against Maya was approaching its desired conclusion. He'd spent the previous evening reviewing personnel files and performance reports, building a case for her transfer to duties that would effectively end her military career. His network of allies had provided suggestions for administrative assignments that would isolate her from meaningful work while creating a paper trail that justified her eventual discharge. What Morrison didn't realize was that his unauthorized access to classified information had triggered security protocols designed to identify potential intelligence breaches. Every file he'd accessed, every query he'd made, every connection he'd established between Maya's cover identity and her real background had been automatically logged and flagged for review by counterintelligence specialists whose job was to protect assets like Ghost Unit 17 from exposure. Captain Rodriguez discovered these security alerts during her own investigation, recognizing immediately that Morrison's behavior represented far more than simple harassment. His systematic targeting of Maya suggested knowledge that should have been impossible for someone with his security clearance and assignment history. Either he'd gained unauthorized access to classified materials, or he was being fed information by someone with far more dangerous motives than personal spite. The implications were staggering. If hostile intelligence services had identified Maya as a former special operations asset, her presence at Camp Sullivan could be part of a larger operation designed to eliminate or compromise American intelligence capabilities. If Morrison was working for foreign interests, his harassment campaign might be intended to force Maya into responses that would expose her true identity and training to enemy surveillance. Rodriguez made the decision to approach Maya directly, despite the security risks involved. 2 professionals with appropriate clearances could find ways to communicate that wouldn't compromise operational security while still addressing the immediate threat that Morrison represented. The conversation would require careful choreography, conducted in locations and circumstances that prevented unauthorized monitoring while allowing both women to assess each other's trustworthiness. Maya's first indication that her situation had changed came during her lunch break, when she found a note in her locker that contained only a room number and a time. The handwriting was feminine, precise, suggesting military training and clear communication under stress. The paper itself was standard-based stationery, unremarkable to casual observation, but positioned in a way that indicated the author understood basic security protocols. The designated meeting location was a maintenance room in the base's communications facility, chosen because its electronic shielding would prevent remote surveillance while its legitimate function provided cover for the presence of personnel from different units. Rodriguez arrived first, conducting a quick sweep for monitoring devices with equipment that confirmed her intelligence background. Maya entered exactly on time, her movements controlled and alert as she assessed the situation for potential threats. The 2 women studied each other in silence for several moments, each recognizing professional competence that went far beyond their official assignments. Rodriguez noted the way Maya positioned herself near the exit while maintaining visual contact with potential hiding places for surveillance equipment. Maya observed Rodriguez's casual confidence in the secure environment, and the subtle bulge beneath her jacket that suggested a concealed weapon, carried by someone comfortable with its presence. "We need to talk," Rodriguez said simply, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to discussing matters of national importance. "About your real background and why Staff Sergeant Morrison knows things he shouldn't know." Maya's hand moved unconsciously toward the pin beneath her uniform jacket, completing one of her ritual touches before she caught herself. The gesture confirmed Rodriguez's suspicions while revealing the depth of trauma that Maya carried from her service with Ghost Unit 17. Years of operational security hadn't eliminated the unconscious behaviors that marked her as someone who'd served in the shadows between military and intelligence communities. "I don't know what you're talking about," Maya replied carefully, maintaining the cover identity that had protected her for months. But her eyes showed recognition of Rodriguez's knowledge and a wariness that spoke of experience with situations where trust could mean the difference between mission success and catastrophic failure. Rodriguez pulled out a tablet computer, its screen displaying classification markings that made Maya straighten with sudden attention. The device showed fragments of operational reports, personnel files, and medical records that painted a picture of Ghost Unit 17's final mission. Maya's photograph appeared in several documents, younger and harder than her current appearance, but unmistakably the same person who now stood in the maintenance room, trying to protect secrets that had already been compromised. "Operation Nightfall," Rodriguez said quietly, watching Maya's reaction to the name that officially didn't exist. 14 operators killed in action. One survivor extracted after 48 hours behind enemy lines. Intelligence failure that led to ambush by hostile forces who seemed to know exactly where and when to strike. Maya's composure cracked slightly, revealing the pain that she'd carried since watching her teammates die in service to a mission that bureaucratic failures had doomed from the beginning. Her fingers found the pin again, completing several rapid touches as she struggled to maintain emotional control in the face of memories that therapy hadn't been able to diminish. "They died because someone in our chain of command was feeding information to the enemy," Maya said, her voice barely above a whisper. 14 of the best soldiers I've ever known, killed because someone sold us out for money or ideology or whatever motivates traitors to betray their own people. Rodriguez nodded grimly, understanding now why Maya's assignment to Camp Sullivan had been designed to provide anonymity and security. The survivor of a compromised operation represented both an intelligence asset and a potential target for elimination by hostile forces. Her cover identity was supposed to protect her from enemies who might want to silence the only witness to betrayal at the highest levels of the intelligence community. "Morrison has been accessing classified files about your background," Rodriguez continued, sharing information that confirmed Maya's growing suspicions about the harassment campaign. His queries triggered security alerts designed to protect assets like you from exposure. Either he's working for the same people who compromised Operation Nightfall, or he stumbled onto information that makes him a useful tool for hostile intelligence services. Maya absorbed this intelligence with the professional calm that had sustained her through years of dangerous operations. Morrison's behavior suddenly made sense when viewed as part of a larger pattern designed to expose or eliminate threats to enemy operations. His harassment wasn't random cruelty, but calculated pressure intended to force responses that would confirm her identity to watchers who remain hidden in the shadows. "What do you recommend?" Maya asked, recognizing that Rodriguez's intelligence background provided expertise that complemented her own operational experience. Two professionals working together could address threats that neither could handle alone, particularly when those threats involved the complex intersection of personal vendettas and intelligence operations. Rodriguez outlined a plan that would expose Morrison's unauthorized access to classified information while protecting Maya's cover identity from further compromise. The approach required careful coordination between intelligence and security personnel, using Morrison's own behavior as evidence of security breaches that threatened national interests. If successful, the operation would eliminate the immediate threat, while potentially uncovering the larger conspiracy that had led to Operation Nightfall's failure. Maya listened carefully, evaluating the proposal with skills developed during years of mission planning under adverse conditions. The strategy was sound but carried risks that could escalate the situation beyond their ability to control. If Morrison was part of a larger intelligence operation, exposing him might trigger responses that put other assets at risk, while revealing the extent of American knowledge about enemy penetration of military and intelligence networks. "There's something else you should know," Maya said, making a decision to trust Rodriguez with information that could compromise operational security. "I've been conducting my own investigation into Morrison's background. His service record shows assignment to joint task forces that handle personnel transitioning from classified operations. He would have had access to information about soldiers like me who were being reassigned under cover identities." Rodriguez felt pieces of the puzzle clicking into place as she realized the scope of the security breach that Morrison represented. If hostile intelligence services had penetrated the programs that protected former special operations personnel, the implications extended far beyond Maya's situation. Hundreds of assets could be at risk from enemies who now knew their identities and locations. The two women spent the next hour comparing their findings, building a comprehensive picture of Morrison's activities and connections that revealed the depth of the threat they faced. His harassment of Maya was just one element of a larger operation designed to identify and eliminate American intelligence assets who posed ongoing threats to enemy interests. The breadth of the conspiracy suggested coordination at levels that reached into the highest echelons of government and military leadership. "We need to move carefully," Rodriguez warned, understanding that premature action could alert other conspirators while failing to address the full scope of the security breach. If Morrison is part of a larger network, exposing him without understanding the complete picture could allow other elements to escape while putting additional assets at risk, Maya agreed. Though every instinct developed during years of combat, operations urged immediate action against identified threats. The patience required for intelligence work differed from the decisive responses that special operations demanded, but she recognized that the current situation required subtlety rather than direct confrontation. Morrison's exposure would come, but only after they'd gathered enough evidence to unravel the entire conspiracy that threatened American intelligence capabilities. Their collaboration was interrupted by footsteps in the corridor outside the maintenance room, forcing both women to assume casual positions that wouldn't suggest clandestine meetings or classified discussions. The interruption reminded them that even secure locations couldn't guarantee privacy in an environment where enemies might have unlimited access to surveillance resources and human intelligence assets. Rodriguez departed first, leaving Maya to follow several minutes later through a different route that avoided areas where their simultaneous presence might be noticed by hostile observers. The meeting had established trust between two professionals while confirming that the situation at Camp Sullivan represented threats that extended far beyond simple harassment or administrative disputes. Maya returned to her routine duties with new understanding of the forces arrayed against her, but also with the knowledge that she was no longer facing those threats alone. Captain Rodriguez's expertise in intelligence operations provided capabilities that complemented Maya's special operations background, creating possibilities for responses that neither could have attempted individually. Staff Sergeant Morrison continued his harassment campaign, unaware that his behavior was now being monitored by professionals who understood its true significance. His unauthorized access to classified files had marked him as a security threat, whose activities would be documented and analyzed until investigators had gathered enough evidence to expose the entire network of which he was part. The next phase of the operation would test both women's ability to maintain their cover while gathering intelligence about Morrison's connections and motives. Maya would continue enduring his harassment, while carefully observing his behavior for signs that revealed his sources and objectives. Rodriguez would use her access to intelligence networks to trace the origins of Morrison's information, while building cases against other potential conspirators. Neither woman fully understood the scope of the conspiracy they'd uncovered, but both recognized that their investigation had revealed threats to national security that extended far beyond Camp Sullivan. The quiet soldier who'd been enduring public humiliation was about to become the key to exposing enemy operations that had penetrated American military and intelligence communities at the highest levels. Morrison's next attack came during a formal inspection conducted by visiting officials from the Pentagon, his timing chosen to maximize the potential damage to Maya's cover identity and career prospects. He'd prepared his presentation carefully, using his unauthorized knowledge of her background to craft accusations that would be difficult to refute without revealing classified information about her real service record. The inspection team included senior officers whose presence suggested that Morrison's superiors had approved his campaign against Maya, either as willing participants in the conspiracy or as unwitting tools manipulated by more sophisticated operators. Their questions about Maya's performance and suitability for continued service seemed designed to elicit responses that would justify her removal from Camp Sullivan and potential discharge from military service. Maya faced the inspection with the same controlled composure that had sustained her through far more dangerous interrogations, answering questions truthfully within the constraints of her cover identity, while avoiding responses that would compromise operational security. Her performance was flawless from a professional standpoint, but the inspectors seemed more interested in Morrison's allegations than in her actual capabilities and conduct. Captain Rodriguez observed the inspection from a distance, noting the specific nature of the questions and the apparent coordination between Morrison and the visiting officials. The pattern suggested that the conspiracy she and Maya had uncovered reached into the highest levels of military command, with Morrison serving as a tool for forces that remained hidden behind bureaucratic legitimacy and official authority. The inspection concluded with recommendations for Maya's transfer to administrative duties that would effectively end her access to operational assignments while creating justification for her eventual discharge. The decision appeared routine to casual observers, but Rodriguez recognized it as another step in a systematic campaign to eliminate an intelligence asset whose knowledge threatened enemy operations. That evening, Rodriguez accessed communication channels that connected her to intelligence professionals whose expertise and authority exceeded anything available through normal military bureaucracy. The conversation that followed would determine whether Maya's situation could be addressed through official channels or whether more direct action would be necessary to protect national security interests. Maya spent that same evening preparing for possibilities that ranged from immediate evacuation to armed confrontation with hostile forces whose penetration of American military installations might be far more extensive than either she or Rodriguez had realized. Her apartment remained deliberately sparse, but she'd begun staging equipment and supplies that would be necessary if her cover identity was blown and enemies moved to eliminate her as a threat to their operations. The next morning would bring new developments that would test both women's ability to distinguish between legitimate authority and hostile manipulation. Morrison's campaign had reached a critical juncture, where further escalation would require responses that could expose the entire conspiracy, while potentially triggering violent confrontation with enemies who'd already demonstrated their willingness to kill American personnel in service of their objectives. Neither Maya nor Rodriguez fully understood the forces they'd set in motion, but both were prepared to do whatever was necessary to protect the mission and the soldiers whose lives depended on maintaining the security of American intelligence. Operations. The quiet war that had been fought in shadows was about to explode into the light, with consequences that would reshape the way the military protected its most valuable assets from enemies who operated within the very institutions they'd sworn to defend. The emergency briefing convened at 0-600 hours in a conference room that most personnel at Camp Sullivan had never seen. Located 3 levels beneath the main administrative building, the facility was designed for discussions that required the highest levels of security and secrecy. The assembled officials represented agencies that rarely coordinated openly, their presence indicating that Maya's situation had escalated beyond routine military personnel matters into realms of national security and counterintelligence operations. General Patricia Hawthorne commanded the room with the authority of someone whose career had been built on making decisions that affected global stability. Her service record included operations that had prevented international conflicts and eliminated threats that most government officials would never know existed. She studied the classified files spread across the conference table with the focused attention of someone who understood that the information they contained could reshape American intelligence capabilities. Colonel James Mitchell sat across from Hawthorne, his weathered face reflecting years of experience in counterintelligence operations that had taken him to every continent where American interests were threatened by hostile forces. His expertise in identifying and neutralizing enemy penetration of military and intelligence networks made him the natural choice to evaluate the conspiracy that Maya and Rodriguez had uncovered. Captain Rodriguez occupied a chair at the far end of the table, her intelligence training evident in the way she organized documents and prepared briefing materials that would convey complex information clearly and efficiently. She'd spent the past 72 hours coordinating with investigators whose backgrounds and capabilities were classified above her clearance level, building a case that connected Morrison's activities to broader threats against American national security. Maya Chen was not present at the briefing, her absence carefully orchestrated to maintain operational security while the assembled officials determined how to address the situation without compromising her safety or exposing other assets who might be at risk from the same conspiracy. Her input had been gathered through secure channels that prevented hostile forces from learning about the investigation or the evidence that had been compiled against their operations. Staff Sergeant Morrison continued his regular duties, unaware that his every action was being monitored by surveillance teams, whose expertise in human intelligence made his amateur efforts at deception laughably transparent. His communications were intercepted and analyzed, his movements tracked with precision that revealed patterns of behavior, consistent with someone operating under direction from external handlers. General Hawthorne opened the briefing with a summary that placed Maya's situation within the broader context of enemy operations against American military and intelligence assets. The conspiracy that had led to Operation Nightfall's failure represented just one element of a comprehensive campaign designed to identify, compromise, and eliminate personnel whose knowledge and capabilities posed ongoing threats to hostile intelligence services. Ghost Unit 17 was targeted because of their effectiveness in operations that disrupted enemy activities across multiple theaters. Hawthorne explained, her voice carrying the weight of someone who'd authorized missions that few people would ever know about. The intelligence failure that led to their ambush wasn't accidental. It was the result of systematic penetration of our operational planning and communication networks by forces that wanted to eliminate our most capable assets. Colonel Mitchell presented evidence that connected Morrison's harassment of Maya to a broader network of individuals who'd been systematically identifying and targeting former Special Operations personnel who'd been reassigned undercover identities. The scope of the conspiracy was staggering, involving hundreds of assets whose locations and new identities had been compromised through unauthorized access to classified databases and personnel files. Morrison isn't acting alone, Mitchell stated, displaying communication intercepts and financial records that revealed patterns of coordination with individuals whose backgrounds suggested foreign intelligence connections. His targeting of Chen follows protocols that indicate training and techniques designed to force psychological breakdown without triggering responses that would expose the harassment as part of intelligence operations. Captain Rodriguez's briefing detailed the specific methods Morrison had used to access classified information about Maya's background, revealing security vulnerabilities that had allowed hostile forces to penetrate systems designed to protect American intelligence assets. Her analysis showed that similar breaches had occurred at installations across the country, suggesting a coordinated campaign that had been operating for years without detection. The assembled officials absorbed this information with the professional calm that came from careers spent dealing with threats to national security. But the implications were sobering, even for personnel accustomed to complex intelligence operations. If hostile forces had successfully penetrated the programs designed to protect former special operations personnel, the damage to American capabilities could be incalculable. General Hawthorne made the decision that would determine Maya's future and potentially expose the full extent of the conspiracy that threatened American intelligence operations. Rather than continuing the investigation through covert channels that might allow other conspirators to escape detection, she authorized a direct confrontation that would force hostile forces into responses that could be monitored and analyzed by counterintelligence specialists. The plan was elegant in its simplicity and devastating in its potential consequences. Maya would be publicly recognized for her service with Ghost Unit 17, her cover identity stripped away in circumstances that would make it impossible for enemies to claim they didn't know her true background. Morrison and his handlers would be forced to respond to this revelation in ways that would expose their methods, connections, and objectives to American intelligence services. "We're using Chen as bait," Hawthorne acknowledged, recognizing the Chinji personal risk that the operation would create for someone who'd already sacrificed more than most soldiers could imagine. "But she's also our best weapon against forces that have been systematically destroying our most valuable assets. Her exposure will force enemies into the open where we can engage them directly." The confrontation was scheduled for the following morning during a base-wide formation that would provide maximum visibility for Maya's public recognition, while creating opportunities to monitor the responses of Morrison and other potential conspirators. Intelligence teams would be positioned throughout the area with equipment that could intercept communications and identify individuals whose reactions suggested knowledge of the operation's true significance. Maya received notification of the FIA plan through secure channels that confirmed her willingness to participate in an operation that would end her anonymity while potentially exposing her to violent retaliation from enemies who'd already demonstrated their willingness to kill American personnel. Her response was characteristically direct, focusing on mission requirements rather than personal concerns about the risks she would face. That evening, Maya completed her ritual touches of the pin beneath her uniform jacket for what she knew might be the final time in the privacy of her anonymous existence at Camp Sullivan. Tomorrow, her service with Ghost Unit 17 would be acknowledged publicly, transforming her from an unknown soldier enduring harassment into a recognized hero whose sacrifices had protected American interests in operations that few people would ever understand. She spent the night preparing for possibilities that ranged from immediate extraction to armed confrontation with hostile forces, whose response to her exposure might include attempts to eliminate her as a threat to their ongoing operations. Her apartment remained deliberately sparse, but she'd positioned equipment and supplies that would be necessary if enemies moved against her with violence rather than the subtle manipulation that had characterized their campaign thus far. Staff Sergeant Morrison's final evening of believing his harassment campaign was succeeding passed quietly, his confidence bolstered by reports from the inspection team that had recommended Maya's transfer to administrative duties. He'd prepared additional humiliations for the following day, planning to escalate his attacks in ways that would force responses he could use to justify her removal from military service entirely. What Morrison didn't realize was that his communications with his handlers had been compromised for weeks, providing American intelligence services with detailed information about enemy objectives and methods that would be used to dismantle their entire network. His role as an unwitting tool for hostile forces was about to end in circumstances that would expose the conspiracy he'd served without fully understanding its scope or consequences. The morning of the confrontation dawned with perfect clarity, the kind of weather that made ceremonies memorable and dramatic revelations impossible to ignore. Base personnel assembled in formation with the precision that characterized military gatherings, their attention focused on what they expected to be routine announcements and administrative updates. General Hawthorne arrived with an entourage that included officials whose presence indicated that the morning's events would be far more significant than standard base activities. Media representatives were notably absent, the classified nature of the proceedings requiring security measures that prevented public documentation of what was about to unfold. Maya took her place in formation with the same controlled composure she'd maintained throughout months of harassment, her uniform immaculate and her bearing reflecting the professionalism that had sustained her through years of dangerous operations. The pin beneath her jacket remained hidden, but its weight against her chest served as a constant reminder of the teammates, whose memory she carried forward through her continued service. Morrison positioned himself where he could observe Maya's reaction to what he expected would be her public humiliation, his anticipation of her disgrace evident in his expression and posture. He'd spent weeks building toward this moment, believing that his systematic campaign of harassment would culminate in her complete professional destruction. Captain Rodriguez stood with other officers, her intelligence training allowing her to identify surveillance personnel, whose presence confirmed that the operation was proceeding according to plan. Counterintelligence specialists were positioned throughout the formation with equipment that would monitor communications and analyze responses to the revelations that were about to transform Maya's situation completely. General Hawthorne began her address with routine announcements that provided cover for the dramatic revelation that would expose the conspiracy against American intelligence assets. Her words were carefully chosen to convey information about Maya's background without compromising operational details that remained classified above the clearance levels of most personnel present. Distinguished service often goes unrecognized because of security requirements that prevent public acknowledgement of sacrifices made in defense of our nation, Hawthorne stated, her voice carrying across the assembled formation with the authority of someone whose career had been built on protecting American interests in the shadows between military and intelligence operations. Morrison's expression began to change as he recognized that the general's words were focused on Maya rather than the administrative announcements he'd been expecting. His confidence started to erode as he realized that his carefully orchestrated campaign might be facing complications that his handlers hadn't anticipated. Sergeant Maya Chun's service record includes assignments that cannot be fully disclosed due to classification requirements, but her contributions to national security deserve recognition despite the constraints imposed by operational secrecy. Hawthorne continued, watching Morrison's reaction with the attention of someone who understood that his response would provide crucial intelligence about enemy operations. Maya remained perfectly still as her real background was revealed to the assembled personnel, her face showing none of the emotion that accompanied the end of 6 months of carefully maintained anonymity. Years of operational discipline allowed her to endure public exposure with the same composure she'd brought to combat operations where emotional control meant the difference between mission success and catastrophic failure. Ghost Unit 17 operated in environments where failure meant death for American personnel and civilians, whose protection was essential to our national interests, Hawthorne explained, providing enough detail to establish Maya's credentials. without compromising information that remained classified. Sergeant Chen's service with this unit included operations that prevented terrorist attacks and eliminated threats that could have resulted in thousands of American casualties. The revelation rippled through the assembled formation like a shockwave, transforming Maya from an anonymous soldier into someone whose service commanded respect and recognition. Personnel who'd witnessed Morrison's harassment began to understand that they'd been observing the systematic humiliation of a genuine war hero whose sacrifices had protected American lives in ways they could never fully appreciate. Morrison's face cycled through expressions that revealed his growing understanding that his campaign against Maya had been based on knowledge that he shouldn't have possessed, and that his exposure was now inevitable. His handlers had promised him protection and advancement in exchange for his services, but those assurances seemed increasingly meaningless as General Hawthorne's words revealed the depth of his misconduct. Operation Nightfall resulted in the loss of 14 exceptional soldiers, whose sacrifice prevented enemy forces from obtaining intelligence that could have compromised American operations across 3 continents. Hawthorne continued, her voice reflecting the weight of losses that had shaped the war against terrorism in ways that few people understood. Sergeant Chen was the sole survivor of an ambush that was made possible by intelligence failures that we now understand were the result of enemy penetration of our operational planning networks. Colonel Mitchell stepped forward as Hawthorne's narrative reached the point where Maya's current situation would be connected to the conspiracy that had targeted her at Camp Sullivan. His presence signaled to Morrison and other potential conspirators that their activities had been discovered, and that the consequences of their betrayal would be swift and comprehensive. Staff Sergeant Morrison's harassment of Sergeant Chen was enabled by unauthorized access to classified information about her background and assignment, Mitchell announced, his words carrying the authority of someone whose career had been built on exposing enemy operations against American military and intelligence capabilities. Morrison's attempted denial was cut short by the presentation of evidence that included communication intercepts, financial records, and surveillance footage that documented his coordination with individuals whose backgrounds suggested foreign intelligence connections. His role as a tool for hostile forces was revealed in detail that made his guilt undeniable and his exposure complete. The base security personnel who moved to arrest Morrison had been positioned strategically throughout the formation, their timing coordinated to prevent escape while allowing counterintelligence specialists to monitor the communications that his detention would trigger among his handlers and collaborators. Maya watched Morrison's arrest with the professional satisfaction of someone who'd seen justice served against enemies who'd threatened American interests. But her expression remained controlled even as months of harassment were finally ended. Her focus was already shifting to the implications of her exposure for ongoing operations and the security of other assets who might be targeted by the same conspiracy. General Hawthorne's final words established Maya's new status, while acknowledging the personal costs of her service and the challenges she would face as her anonymity was replaced by recognition that came with its own dangers and responsibilities. The Silent Valor Medal is awarded for distinguished service in classified operations that cannot be publicly acknowledged but represent the highest standards of courage and dedication to protecting American interests, Hawthorne stated, pinning the decoration to Maya's uniform in a ceremony that few people would ever witness, but that represented acknowledgement of sacrifices that had shaped the course of international security. Maya accepted the recognition with the same quiet dignity she'd brought to every aspect of her service, understanding that the medal represented not just her own contributions, but the sacrifices of 14 teammates who would never receive the honors they'd earned through their dedication to duty and their willingness to die in defense of American lives. The formation was dismissed with instructions that reflected the classified nature of the morning's revelations, personnel returning to their duties with new understanding of the forces that operated in the shadows of military service, but with restrictions on discussing what they'd witnessed that were backed by security regulations and personal integrity. Captain Rodriguez approached Maya as the crowd dispersed, her expression reflecting professional respect, mixed with personal admiration for someone who'd endured months of harassment without compromising operational security or revealing the true nature of her background and capabilities. "What happens now?" Rodriguez asked, understanding that Maya's exposure would necessitate changes to her assignment and security arrangements that might separate her from the quiet routine that had provided stability during her recovery from the trauma of Operation Nightfall. Maya's response reflected the forward-looking perspective that had sustained her through years of dangerous operations and months of systematic humiliation. Rather than dwelling on past injustices or present recognition, she focused on future opportunities to serve American interests in ways that honored the memory of fallen teammates while contributing to missions that would protect other soldiers from facing similar betrayals. "I've been offered assignment to a new unit that's being formed to protect assets like me from the kind of conspiracy that Morrison represented," Maya explained, touching the pin beneath her uniform jacket in the ritual that had sustained her through the darkest periods of her recovery. "The work will be dangerous, but it'll make sure that other soldiers don't face what I faced here." Rodriguez nodded, understanding that Maya's new assignment would take her back into the shadows where her skills and experience would be most valuable in protecting American intelligence capabilities from enemy operations. The quiet soldier who'd endured harassment with such remarkable composure was returning to the kind of work that had defined her military career, and that gave meaning to her survival when better soldiers had died. The investigation that followed Morrison's arrest revealed the full scope of the conspiracy that had threatened American intelligence assets for years, leading to arrests and security improvements that would prevent similar penetrations of classified systems in the future. Maya's exposure had forced enemy networks into responses that allowed counterintelligence specialists to dismantle operations that had been responsible for the deaths of American personnel in multiple theaters. Morrison himself proved to be a relatively minor figure in the conspiracy, his role as a harassment tool revealing larger patterns of enemy operations while providing evidence that led to the identification and elimination of more significant threats to American security. His cooperation with investigators was motivated more by fear than patriotism, but it contributed to the broader effort to protect American assets from hostile intelligence services. Maya's final weeks at Camp Sullivan passed quietly as she prepared for transition to her new assignment, her exposure having ended the harassment, while establishing her as someone whose background commanded respect from personnel who understood the significance of her service. The recognition was welcome after months of systematic humiliation, but it also carried responsibilities that would shape the rest of her military career. Her apartment remained deliberately sparse as she prepared for departure, the absence of personal items reflecting a life that had been shaped by the requirements of operational security and the need to move quickly when missions demanded it. The scholarship she'd been funding anonymously for families of her fallen teammates would continue, but they would be administered through different channels that maintained the privacy she believed those families deserved. The pin beneath her uniform jacket would travel with her to the new assignment, its weight a constant reminder of 14 soldiers whose sacrifice had prevented enemy forces from achieving objectives that could have resulted in thousands of American casualties. Her ritual of 17 touches would continue, but they would be performed in new environments where her skills and experience would contribute to missions that protected other assets from facing similar betrayals. Captain Rodriguez's farewell was brief but sincere, two professionals acknowledging shared respect for service that often went unrecognized, but that was essential to protecting American interests in an increasingly dangerous world. Their collaboration had exposed a significant threat to national security, while protecting an asset whose capabilities would continue to serve American objectives in assignments that few people would ever know about. Maya's departure from camp Sullivan was as quiet as her arrival had been 6 months earlier, but the circumstances were entirely different. She was no longer an anonymous soldier seeking anonymity and routine to recover from trauma. She was a recognized professional whose exposure had served national interests while transforming her from a victim of enemy operations into an active participant in the effort to prevent similar attacks against other American assets. The new assignment would take her back into the shadows where Ghost Unit 17 had operated, but with better security and support systems that had been developed. In response to the intelligence failures that had led to Operation Nightfall's tragedy, her experience as both an operator and a target would contribute to training programs designed to prepare other assets for the complex threats they would face in an environment where enemies operated within American institutions as well as in foreign territories. Maya Chen's story at Camp Sullivan had ended, but her service would continue in ways that honored the memory of fallen teammates, while protecting future generations of soldiers from facing similar betrayals. The quiet strength that had sustained her through months of harassment would serve her well in assignments where the stakes were measured in lives saved rather than recognition received, where success was defined by threats prevented rather than medals awarded. The pin beneath her uniform jacket would continue to carry the weight of 14 promises kept and 17 missions completed, but it would also represent the beginning of new chapters in a career dedicated to ensuring that American soldiers could serve their country without facing the kind of betrayal that had turned loyal service into target marking for enemy operations. Her final touch of the pin as she left Camp Sullivan was number 17 of the day, completed as her transport arrived to take her to an assignment where her skills and experience would contribute to missions that protected other soldiers from facing what she had endured and overcome through quiet determination and unwavering commitment to the oath she had sworn to defend American interests regardless of personal cost. The black sedan pulled away from Camp Sullivan as dawn broke over the Virginia mountains, carrying Maya Chen toward an assignment that would test everything she'd learned about survival, service, and the complex intersection of loyalty and betrayal. In modern warfare, the driver was a woman approximately her own age, whose posture and alertness suggested military training that went beyond standard transportation duties. Their conversation was minimal, both understanding that operational security began the moment Maya had left the relative safety of her exposed position at Camp Sullivan. 3 hours into the journey, they stopped at a rest area that appeared unremarkable to casual observers, but had been chosen for qualities that Maya recognized immediately. Multiple exit routes, clear sight lines in all directions, and the kind of isolated positioning that allowed for secure communications without electronic surveillance. The driver produced a tablet computer whose encryption protocols required biometric verification before displaying information that explained Maya's destination and new responsibilities. Fort Blackwater existed on no public maps and appeared in no official military publications, its location and purpose classified at levels that required presidential authorization to access. The facility served as headquarters for a joint task force that had been established in response to the kind of conspiracy that Morrison had represented, dedicated to protecting American intelligence assets from hostile operations that targeted them for elimination or compromise. Maya's new unit would be designated Sentinel Team 7, composed of personnel whose backgrounds included experience as both operators and targets of enemy intelligence operations. Their mission would be proactive rather than reactive, identifying and neutralizing threats before they could develop into the kind of systematic campaigns that had nearly destroyed her own cover at Camp Sullivan. The briefing materials revealed that Maya's situation had been far from unique. Over the past 5 years, 47 former Special Operations personnel had been targeted by harassment campaigns designed to force psychological breakdowns that would justify their removal from military service. 15 had been successfully driven to resignation or discharge, their expertise lost to American intelligence capabilities, while their knowledge of classified operations remained vulnerable to exploitation by hostile forces. Morrison's network had been responsible for 12 of these successful eliminations, using techniques that had been refined through practice and coordination with intelligence professionals, whose expertise in psychological manipulation exceeded anything available in standard military training. The conspiracy's sophistication suggested state-level resources and coordination, indicating that American intelligence assets were facing threats that required responses at the highest levels of government and military authority. Fort Blackwater represented that response, a facility designed to serve as both sanctuary and training center for personnel whose service had made them permanent targets of enemy operations. The compound was protected by security measures that exceeded those found at most classified installations, with defensive capabilities that could repel direct military assault while maintaining the electronic countermeasures necessary to prevent intelligence penetration. Maya's driver was Captain Lisa Torres, herself a former special operations asset, who'd survived an assassination attempt that had killed 3 teammates during what was supposed to be a routine training exercise at a conventional military installation. Her assignment to Sentinel Team 7 represented both protection from ongoing threats and utilization of expertise gained through experience as a target of hostile intelligence operations. The transition is difficult, Torres explained as they approached the checkpoint that marked the boundary of Fort Blackwater's security perimeter. Going from anonymity back to operational status requires adjustments that most people don't understand. You'll be working with personnel who faced similar experiences, which helps, but it also means everyone carries trauma that affects performance in ways that standard military training doesn't address. Maya absorbed this information with the professional calm that had sustained her through months of harassment and exposure, understanding that her new assignment would require skills that differed from both conventional military service and the special operations work that had defined her career before Operation Nightfall. Protecting other assets would demand expertise in threat assessment and prevention that complemented her combat capabilities while requiring emotional resilience. That took into account the psychological cost of living as a permanent target. The security checkpoint processed their arrival with efficiency that reflected both advanced technology and human expertise trained to identify threats that conventional screening might miss. Guards whose bearing suggested special operations. Backgrounds conducted inspections that went far beyond standard military procedures. Their attention focused on details that could indicate compromise or infiltration by hostile forces. Fort Blackwater's interior revealed architecture designed for both functionality and security, with buildings that could serve as defensive positions while housing the sophisticated equipment necessary for intelligence operations at the highest classification levels. The facility's population was small, perhaps 200 personnel whose specializations ranged from counterintelligence analysis to direct action capabilities that could be deployed against threats that required elimination rather than arrest. Maya's quarters were located in a residential building that provided both privacy and security, with communications equipment that allowed secure contact with personnel who might need to coordinate rapid response to threats against assets in the field. Her room was larger than her apartment at Camp Sullivan, but she furnished it with the same deliberate sparseness that had characterized her living arrangement since Operation Nightfall's aftermath. The pin from her Ghost Unit 17 service found its place in a small wooden box that also contained the Silent Valor Medal she'd received during the ceremony that had ended her harassment at Camp Sullivan. Both items represented chapters of her service that had concluded, but their presence would remind her of obligations that continued even as her responsibilities evolved to encompass protection of other soldiers who faced similar threats. First briefing at Fort Blackwater was conducted by Colonel Sarah Mitchell, whose own background included survival of the intelligence failure that had led to Operation Nightfall's ambush. Mitchell had been serving as liaison to the Joint task force that was coordinating Ghost Unit 17's mission when enemy forces had demonstrated their knowledge of operational details that should have been known only to personnel with the highest security clearances. The conspiracy we're fighting isn't limited to harassment campaigns against individual assets, Mitchell explained, her words carrying the weight of someone who'd spent years investigating the networks that threatened American intelligence capabilities. Morrison and his associates represent one operational method, but our enemies are using multiple approaches to identify, compromise, and eliminate personnel whose knowledge and capabilities pose ongoing threats to their activities. Maya learned that other methods included recruitment of military and intelligence personnel through ideological manipulation, financial incentives, and coercion based on threats against family members. The scope of enemy operations suggested coordination at levels that reached into the highest echelons of American government and military command, requiring responses that went beyond conventional counterintelligence procedures. Sentinel Team 7's approach would combine traditional protective measures with proactive operations, designed to disrupt enemy activities before they could achieve their objectives. Maya's experience as both a special operations asset and a target of hostile intelligence operations provided perspectives that would be valuable in developing strategies that protected other personnel while eliminating threats at their sources. Her first assignment involved traveling to Fort Carson in Colorado, where another former special operations asset was facing harassment that followed patterns similar to what Morrison had used against Maya at Camp Sullivan. Staff Sergeant Amanda Reeves had served with Delta Force before reassignment to conventional duties designed to provide anonymity and security during her recovery from injuries sustained during a classified operation in Southeast Asia. The harassment campaign against Reeves was being conducted by Master Sergeant Kevin Phillips, whose background showed the same indicators that had marked Morrison as a security threat: unauthorized access to classified personnel files, coordination with individuals whose connections suggested foreign intelligence involvement, and systematic targeting designed to force psychological breakdown that would justify removal from military service. Maya's role would be to establish surveillance of Phillips, while documenting evidence that could be used to expose his activities and identify his handlers. The assignment required the kind of careful observation and intelligence gathering that had been essential elements of her service with Ghost Unit 17, but applied to protecting American assets rather than eliminating foreign threats. Fort Carson's environment differed significantly from Camp Sullivan, its larger size and diverse mission providing both opportunities and challenges for surveillance operations. Maya's cover identity as a personnel specialist conducting routine administrative reviews gave her access to areas where Phillips operated, while providing justification for her presence during activities that might reveal his methods and connections. Reeves herself was unaware of Maya's true purpose, her protection requiring operational security that prevented disclosure of Sentinel Team 7's involvement in her situation. Maya observed her target from a distance, noting signs of stress and isolation that indicated Phillips's harassment was achieving its intended psychological effects. The surveillance revealed that Phillips was using techniques that were more sophisticated than Morrison's relatively crude harassment methods. His approach included manipulation of Reeves's duty assignments to create situations where she would fail, coordination with medical personnel to question her fitness for duty, and systematic isolation from colleagues who might provide support. During her ordeal, Maya documented Phillips's activities with the professional precision that had characterized her intelligence work with Ghost Unit 17, building a case that would expose not only his misconduct, but also the network of collaborators who enabled his harassment campaign. The evidence would be sufficient to trigger arrests and security improvements, while protecting Reeves from further targeting by hostile forces. The investigation also revealed that Phillips was coordinating his activities with personnel at other military installations, suggesting that the conspiracy against American intelligence assets was more extensive than even Colonel Mitchell had suspected. Maya's findings would contribute to broader operations designed to dismantle networks that threatened dozens of former special operations personnel across multiple commands. Her success at Fort Carson led to additional assignments that took her to installations throughout the United States, each presenting unique challenges that required adaptation of surveillance techniques and intelligence gathering methods. Maya's expertise in threat assessment and her experience as a target of similar harassment made her particularly effective in identifying patterns that other investigators might miss. 6 months after leaving Camp Sullivan, Maya had contributed to operations that resulted in 17 arrests and the exposure of enemy networks that had been responsible for the elimination of numerous American intelligence assets. Her work was saving careers and potentially lives, while degrading hostile intelligence capabilities that had been developed over years of patient infiltration and recruitment. The personal costs of this success were significant but manageable through the support systems that Fort Blackwater provided for personnel whose service had made them permanent targets of enemy operations. Maya's ritual touching of her pin continued, but it was now performed in contexts where her fallen teammates' sacrifice was being honored through protection of other soldiers who faced similar betrayals. Her relationship with Captain Torres had evolved into professional partnership that combined their complementary skills in ways that enhanced both their effectiveness and their security. Two former special operations assets working together could address threats that neither could handle alone, while providing mutual support during assignments that required extended periods under cover in potentially hostile environments. Maya's expertise in combat operations complemented Torres's background in intelligence analysis, creating capabilities that were particularly valuable when investigations revealed that harassment campaigns were being coordinated with more direct threats against assets whose knowledge posed the greatest dangers to enemy operations. Some targets were facing not just psychological pressure, but actual assassination attempts that required immediate protective responses. The evolution of enemy tactics forced corresponding changes in Sentinel Team 7's operations, with Maya increasingly called upon to use skills that went beyond surveillance and intelligence gathering. Her special operations background became essential when protection of American assets required direct action against hostile forces who were prepared to use violence to achieve their objectives. One such operation took her to a private security facility in Nevada where a former Navy SEAL was being held under circumstances that appeared legitimate but actually represented kidnapping by forces seeking to extract information about classified submarine operations. Maya's infiltration of the facility and extraction of the target required combat skills that she hadn't used since Operation Nightfall, bringing back memories of teammates who had died in similar circumstances. The successful rescue confirmed that enemy operations against American intelligence assets had escalated beyond harassment and psychological manipulation into direct action that posed immediate threats to both national security and individual lives. Maya's ability to respond to these threats with appropriate levels of force made her increasingly valuable to operations that required capabilities beyond conventional military or law enforcement resources. Her success also brought recognition from officials whose authority extended far beyond military command structures, acknowledgement that her service was contributing to protection of American interests at levels that few people would ever understand. The recognition was personally meaningful, but Maya remained focused on operational requirements rather than career advancement or public acknowledgement of her contributions. The pin beneath her uniform jacket continued to carry the weight of 14 promises kept and 17 missions completed, but it now also represented new chapters in a career dedicated to ensuring that other soldiers could serve their country without facing the kind of betrayal that had turned loyal service into target marking for enemy operations. Her touching ritual remained constant, but its meaning had evolved to encompass protection of living assets as well as remembrance of fallen teammates. Maya's work with Sentinel Team 7 had given new purpose to survival that had once seemed meaningless, transforming guilt over her teammates' deaths into determination to prevent other soldiers from facing similar betrayals. The quiet strength that had sustained her through months of harassment was now directed toward missions that honored fallen comrades while protecting those who continued to serve American interests despite the constant threat of enemy operations against them. Her story continued to unfold in environments where success was measured by threats prevented rather than recognition received, where the true test of service was willingness to face danger without expectation of public acknowledgement or career advancement. Maya Chen had found her place in this shadow war, carrying forward the mission of Ghost Unit 17, while protecting a new generation of assets from enemies who operated within American institutions as well as foreign territories. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.